So now that they're done with, here's a quick question. Why were people protesting the Olympics? It's the one time every few years that the world collectively gives a damn about sports like track, gymnastics, swimming, diving, and whatever the a steeplechase is. And while every games is bound to have a controversy or two, it seems like only recently that the games themselves have become controversial. A poll amongst Japanese citizens taken earlier this summer found that around 83% opposed the idea of hosting the games this summer. And this was even after it had been postponed a year for safety reasons. And while it still may seem ill-advised to hold an international sporting event somewhere where COVID cases are on the rise and only 8% of the population is vaccinated, it would also be ill-advised to assume that this is the first time people are opposed to having them. In fact, there are activists who have been raising concerns about the Olympics and their ethical, societal, economic, and environmental impact for decades. First, let's look at how a host city gets chosen in the first place. Because simply submitting a bid to be an Olympic host city costs many millions of dollars. They've got to pay for consultants, event organizers, and travel expenses. Submitting a host bid to the International Olympic Committee can cost easily anywhere from $50 to $100 million, and there is no guarantee whatsoever that this investment will pan out. It's so expensive, in fact, that the city of Toronto had to withdraw itself from consideration for 2024 because they could not afford to bid. Not to mention that, before it was tapped to host these past games, the city of Tokyo famously spent $150 million on its bid to host the 2016 games. But rather than take the L, they turned around and spent another $75 million the next time around. And then, once the city is chosen to host the games, they can anticipate paying a lot more to build all the facilities and infrastructure it needs to actually make the games and the events and the ceremonies happen. Officials in Tokyo estimated that they would spend around $7.4 billion all in to host the games, or over 1,000 times what they spent for their most recent host bid. But the actual cost was almost 3 times that, coming in at over $20 billion, making it the most expensive summer games ever. And if you think that gap is just a one-time phenomenon due to COVID, think again. Actually, every single Olympic Games since 1960 has seen a significant overrunning cost. Now, presumably, all this spending is okay because there's money to be made back through tourism, broadcast royalties, sponsorships, added jobs, and improved infrastructure. The problem is that when it comes to the actual impact, the benefits consistently fall well short of the rosy projections typically made by operators in the construction industry and others that stand to benefit. For starters, the IOC keeps more than half of the biggest chunk of change generated by the games, which is TV revenue. As for tourism, that's a mixed bag. Cities like Barcelona, Sydney, and Vancouver saw some increases, while cities like London, Beijing, and Salt Lake City saw their overall tourism actually go down. And as for jobs that the games create, they're pretty much all temporary and leave no long-term impact. All in all, the costs virtually always exceed the profits. There's only ever been one Olympic Games to generate a surplus, which were the 1984 Games in Los Angeles, and that's because the city was able to rely on existing infrastructure, which if you live in LA is more than a little ironic. And that's still not counting the long-term costs of the White Elephants, which is a nickname for the large structures usually built just for the games that create economic burdens long after the games leave. The famous Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing, that still costs a whopping $10 million a year to maintain and largely goes unused for most of the year. Sydney's Olympic Stadium costs $30 million a year to maintain, and most facilities built for the Athens Olympics, the building of which helped fuel the country's huge debt crisis, have already fallen into ruin. And even though that city's known for ruins, that's still not good. And we haven't even talked about other issues surrounding the Olympics, such as its environmental impacts or the human rights issues it generates around the displacement of local residents, the violation of labor rights, and the suppression of public opinion and expression in authoritarian countries like China. So yeah, leave it up to us to be a buzzkill yet again. Here's one of the few things that everyone seems to like nowadays, and we had to ruin it by talking about budgets and human rights. But here's the thing, there is actually a way to fix a lot of these issues in one fell swoop. Seriously, all we have to do is stop moving the Olympics all over the world and just host it in the same spot every 2 years. That saves the cost of bidding and all that unnecessary construction right off the bat. And if done right, the construction of a permanent facility could help address environmental and human rights issues too. The only ones standing in the way are the IOC, who still love making cities and countries tap dance for the privilege of hosting them. At the end of the day, they're the international sporting equivalent of that friend who does nothing but couch surf. And the number of cities vying applying to host just keeps going down, which is why they've started making the bidding process a secret. So just like with that couchsurfing friend, if everyone in their contacts list decided to tell them no, they'd be forced to get a place of their own. But since we've got host cities lined up until 2032, we'll just have to wait for that to happen. So here's something else to watch while you do.
If there's any topic out there that's got you scratching your head and you're too scared to ask, you should totally send it our way. Tweet using the hashtag #QuickQuestion or email us at questions@brainjoltmedia.com. Don't forget to follow us, and remember, quick questions don't always have quick answers.